Hello and welcome to this special discussion on a book written by Salman Aneez Soz. Now, Salman is a member of the Congress party. He's a spokesperson for the Congress. But more importantly, why we are discussing this book is that he is a trained economist. He's worked with the World Bank. He has experience of development economics from the World Bank perspective. Worked with various countries before formally full-time joining the Congress. More specifically, why we have him in our studios here is because he's written a book called The Great Disappointment. This book is about a very well-written book, very comprehensively researched. It's about how Narendra Modi squandered a unique opportunity to transform the Indian economy in the last 5 years. So, what all went wrong with the Indian economy? Where are we today? As you all know, the economy is in a deep funk today with all high frequency indicators for consumption really down. Have you ever heard of Maruti, India's largest car making company, cutting production by 40% across the board over the last 3 months? Even Hindustan Lever, which sells consumer staples, their top executives are talking about combating a mild form of recession in consumer staple sales. Never heard of before, even after the 2008 global financial crisis. Consumer staples were doing well. You all know real estate has been down for the last many years. So, what has gone wrong? This book actually answers many questions, and I would recommend all the students of economics to have a look at it. Welcome to our show, Salman. So,
Thank you.
tell us. I've read through your book, found it very interesting. Why don't you just give us an idea of how you came to write this book, what triggered this idea, and how you produce it so fast?
Yeah. Well, there are two things there. One is that I was in the obviously I'm a member of the opposition, but when Prime Minister Modi was candidate Modi, one of his assertions was that he would do in 60 months what others, including Atal Bihari Vajpayee, did not do in 60 years.
Yeah.
I found that to be disingenuous, knowing that development is a very crazy, complicated process, and that kind of an assertion was flat out wrong. And the other part of it is that my agent at Penguin, she had been after me for 2 years to write something, write a book on Kashmir, maybe write on something else. And Swati Chopra, she was dogged in her pursuit. And then finally she said, the economy, I mean, that's something that you keep writing about.
Yeah.
I used to write a lot of articles. Yeah. And she said, why don't you at least focus on this? Wouldn't it be good to kind of do an assessment of how the Modi government has done? This is your area. And, that struck with, that struck a chord. And I said, okay, maybe that's what I'll do. I'd actually done a 3 years of Modinomics earlier as a report.
Okay.
And so I thought it would be easier to kind of build on that. And that's what I did.
Okay. Tell me, Salman, I've read through some of the chapters. You kind of sequentially, you look at what happened during the Modi government. Now, many of the issues that you discuss here are also partly legacy issues, yes. like the bank NPA, non-performing asset problems. The twin balance sheet problem, as our chief economic advisor Arvind Subramaniam called it. Now, those were problems which were in continuum, which came into the. Of course, the government did not respond to the challenges even there. Now, if I can ask you 2 or 3 big markers of failure of this government on the economic front, on the political economic front, what would you say?
See, it's a very good question. You brought up this idea of legacy. In some ways, the first part of this book is about inheritance, legacy for different prime ministers at different times of independence. So in fact,
Nehruvian.
yeah, some people, you get in a legacy, you get some good things, some not so good things. Nehru got 6 million refugees, which was the second biggest refugee crisis, outside of World War II, and he also had a serious deficiency in food production. So the big issue for independent India was food. There was not enough food. Similarly, other prime ministers had different legacies, and Prime Minister Modi also inherited some positives and some not so positive things. But this banking sector issue, I think, is at the crux of what has gone wrong.
Even today, it has worsened.
That's exactly right. So
situation not improved.
And the thing is that when a new prime minister, when a new government comes in, of course, the establishment is there, the Ministry of Finance is there, the RBI is there. Now, this issue of NPAs in the banking sector had been flagged by various agencies since 2012. And 2012, 2013, the World Bank, the IMF, the Reserve Bank of India, the Department of Economic Affairs, everybody had been talking about this incipient kind of problem in the banking sector. But I think when the government came in, there was this euphoria. Now, by the way, the economy was recovering at that time when the government took over. So I think maybe the government made a calculation that this would resolve itself. But banking sector issues do not resolve themselves.
The assumption was the economy will pick up and all the assets will start performing.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I think
all the loans will start performing.
I think I think that was a grave miscalculation if that is how they thought about it. And what happened over the next couple of years is that your arteries were choked. And the economy kept getting these heart attacks to some extent. So that was
in a sense, bank credit never really picked up.
In fact, it had gone down. It was in the dumps.
So we've had nearly 5 years of bank credit being very, very sluggish, right? Growth.
Very sluggish. And that was one. The other thing, in order to figure out how we got here, it's important to see what happened. I think there were errors of omission and commission. So this was clearly an error of omission. Then, if you remember, crude prices started falling, right? At the same time, weather forecasts had called for a deficient monsoon in India in 2014. Actually, we had 2 straight years of deficient rains, right? And because of these monsoon failures, which you cannot blame Modi for, Prime Minister Modi for that.
Rural demand must have depressed.
So farmers were in trouble, rural demand was depressed, and what did the government do? If you remember, the government actually came out with an MSP increase of 50 rupees in its first year. And there was much criticism for that. And so MSP...
This is after promising that they would give farmers 50% over their
plus cost.
Input costs, which later changed to doubling of their income by 2020.
That they were far away from there. And the other thing was Manrega implementation was also weak in these first years. I think they had this preconceived notion that Manrega was bad, and so the combination of monsoon failures, and this contractionary policy of low MSP increase, plus this Manrega implementation problems, that created serious difficulties there. So you have rural economies in trouble. 60% of your people are engaged in the rural economy. No wonder, and that, by the way, translates into, it kind of gets transmitted to the formal sector, because after all, if if you live in the villages, you have to buy toothpaste and soap and all these things.
And even today, rural demand is so depressed.
That is right, and for that there are other reasons. So then, so now you have these 2 years, and they're done on the banking sector. The credit flow is still weak. Now, if you remember, before demonetization, growth was actually going down. For 5 quarters or so, growth was declining. The rate of growth was declining. But 2016 was a normal year for as far as monsoons were concerned.
15-16 was a normal year. I think they got close to 8%, no?
Yeah, and but then demonetization happened. Now demonetization, even
and that you mentioned in one chapter you say. They could have avoided demonetization, not harmed the economy at that stage.
Well, because that is when farmers were recovering. The rural economy was, I think that was a chance, because there was a good year of monsoons. But then your economy is kind of, the growth is declining, and then you put in this mindless initiative. Now, even people like myself, we thought that this would be a short, maybe about 3-4 quarters or something like that impact.
The output loss would come back,
yeah.
output would come back, but it hasn't come back.
It hasn't come back, and in fact, I write about IMF research, which talks about these kinds of shocks, and there are permanent output losses. So basically, the way it works is you lose your business. It's not as if after 5-6 months you just restart as if nothing happened. Yeah. And that's what happened, and that's why jobs were lost too. That's why people started migrating back to the villages.
And back-to-back GST also, which came.
And then in 2017 there was GST. And the kind of GST that where I think there's much more focus on optics and getting it going. There's parliament session and all that stuff.
A GST which started as an apple ended up as an orange.
No. I mean, if it were still an orange, it would be something else. Orange is still tasty, but this is just a total disaster because you see, the other thing that policymakers in India have to understand is that our implementation capacity is limited in the bureaucracy. We tend to think of IAS officers and all that, and civil service is it, and everybody's like that. That's not the way it works. India is a vast country. Below the top officers, there are other layers of officialdom.
So you think Modi's dependence on the state apparatus has been far too much, and economic freedoms have at the cost of economic freedoms?
I think I talk about centralization. I mean, there is a lot of centralization in this government, and India is too diverse, too big, too complicated to be run like that. I think that is a severe difficulty. Now, I don't personally think that Mr. Modi can change himself. I personally think that after you turn 30, your habits are pretty much set.
Tell me, okay.
So I think that is not his style does not lend itself to the kind of management and stewardship that is required for the Indian economy.
Kind of decentralized kind of function.
Yeah, you need to decentralize. You need to have a team. You need to kind of build capacity, and you need to come up with things that are implementable as well. GST, in my opinion, so complex. I mean, the World Bank also calls it one of the most complex indirect tax systems in the world. You need fewer rates, and you need lower rates.
You talk about it.
There's a compliance issue, and now, of course, the Congress Party has said that they're going to have a single rate GST with kind of essentials, basically tax.
So you think that GST needs to be altered in a very fundamental way?
This is not going to work. This is not going to work.
Any ideas you have on how it can be altered? I mean, is Congress Party also thinking about?
Yeah, that's what I was saying. That the Congress Party has basically talked about a single rate GST, which is in many countries. Of course,
really single, or there'd be 0, there'd be 5.
No, there won't. There'll be 0 and a single moderate rate. Okay. And Mr. Jaitley, the finance minister, of course, kind of says that now they're going to tax BMWs and milk at the same rate. That's not what the Congress has proposed. I think basic essential goods would be 0% or tax exempt altogether. Okay. Then there'd be a moderate tax rate. You also have to think about compliance. Look at what's happened to GST collections. They're down. I mean, down way below.
I personally feel, Salman, I don't know what do you think of this particular issue. If you look at some of the other countries which implemented GST in Europe, etc., the threshold there was pretty high. If you do a rupee equivalent, I don't think there should be any GST for up to at least couple of crores of turnover.
I think the government has tried to simplify things. But
out there it's about $1 million. The threshold is about $1 million.
I actually
below which there is no.
I think. I think in India you need it even lower, because we tend to always compare ourselves with the developed world, which is okay to be aspirational, but you have to be practical. People keep, I'm always confounded by this question. Only these % of the people are paying taxes in India. First of all, they always take it as a ratio of the total population, which is ridiculous because up to 18, I mean, how can you pay taxes? But then, not many people in India are earning enough to be paying taxes. Why is this? I mean, this nonsense it keeps going on, and everybody's now kind of people are not paying enough tax. So I think the government, this particular government especially, has focused so much on tax. That's what they did with the fuel. By the way, that's another contractionary policy. Crude prices fell. I would say, okay, you do not want to pass on the whole benefit to the consumers, but when you have demand problems, at least pass on some of the benefits.
So here is a question now on the fuel thing. The government had a huge benefit of the fuel prices dropping, and they had, I'm told, over 2-3 years they had an upside of about 10-11 lakh crores.
Over 4 years.
Over 4 years, yeah. And the dilemma was how much to pass on to directly to the consumer so that he would spend, he or she would spend, or they chose to spend almost the entire thing, as they say, in infrastructure. Now, I am wondering where is the infrastructure that they claim that they have spent on, and if they have spent on, how come there is no the crowding in effect? Where are the private investments?
Private investments are not coming along, and I think that's the big story.
I thought that is the biggest story of the last 5 years, that private investment never recovered. Yeah.
It did not recover. I think the government kept through capital expenditures, kept overall investment up. But I think that's a mistake. You have to create an ecosystem where private investment really thrives. Without that, you're not going to go far, because the government really cannot do so much, because its current expenditures are so high. I think one thing I will, yes, I'm from the Congress, but I do want to say that the manifesto that the Congress has this time actually is a very interesting construct, whereby they say, there'll be a delineation between the public sector and the private sector. The public sector will focus on public goods for the most part, which is important. Why should the government be in the business of running hotels and all that? That should be for the private sector. And private investment, the Congress manifesto says, should be taking the lead. Okay, I think that is what we should all commit to. Because every party should kind of really focus on where taxpayer money should be best used. Public education is important. Public health is important. Even there, I feel that we need to first make sure that we are spending that money effectively, and focusing more on outcomes rather than on how much money, 6% of GDP.
But tell me, since you've spoken of the Congress manifesto, recently one of the members of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, Ratin Roy, who is also the director of NIPFP. Yeah. He has, he gave a very scathing, he made a very scathing indictment of the policies that we are following, generally, not just this government. Yeah. And he has argued that India may fall into a middle income trap like Brazil, because our welfare policy, our welfare spending probably is running way ahead of what our growth might afford in terms of tax revenues. Now, if you see the manifesto of the Congress party,
with Nyaya,
to me, with Nyaya, etc., one does not quarrel with the basic idea. But do we have at this level of growth? We are seeing a decline in actually GDP growth. Nobody believes the GDP figures. Now, at this stage, do you think we can afford welfare giveaways, welfare policies, or welfare transfers? Giveaway is the wrong word. Of this order?
Well, first, what many in India do not realize is that India spends very little on social protection. Yeah. The Asian Development Bank actually in 2016, I think they have this social indicators.
That is true. Even on health education, we spend.
So we don't really spend
far less than even other developing countries.
Asian countries. In fact, India was ranked 24th out of 35 countries in terms of social protection, funding as a share of the economy. So even we were lower than Nepal and Pakistan also, by the way. So I think there is a misconception in the country that there's too much welfareism. In fact,
no, I'm not saying that. I'm. Let me clarify. I believe that we need more welfare, targeted welfare spending, especially in health education itself, where we are way below China. China. So my question is, how do we get there without growth giving us the requisite resources?
So Ratin has some interesting points that he raised in a couple of columns recently. He's been talking about these issues for a while, and ultimately he talks about structural changes in the economy. Yeah. And I actually mentioned in this book as well that the structure of the economy needs to change, because if you this whole idea that the Prime Minister came up with, we're going to have Make in India, for example. What we have to understand is that trying to copy the labor-intensive manufacturing model of China and Korea and all that may not work right now. the way it did 40 years back or 30 years back, because the
You have to think
world has moved
differently.
on. The world has moved on. We're in a very different situation now. We have to think about now and the future. We cannot think about what happened then. What happened then may have been more conducive to that time for China or for Korea. Not for us. It's a new situation. So yes, there have to be some changes. Now, how do we get the economy going, so to speak? I think we need short-term measures, clearly, because the economy is in trouble.
What will be the challenge for the next government?
Yes, so the next government is in deep trouble.
Yeah.
So no matter who comes to power, they're in deep trouble. Because
all the fiscal numbers have gone haywire.
So yeah, that's the interesting. The Ministry of Finance comes out with this latest monthly economic report in which they basically say that growth is slowing down. The proximate causes are consumption is slowing down, investment is slowing down, exports are slowing down. What is left?
What is left? Yeah.
And you talked about these underlying high frequency indicators.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at the record of this government. It's very strange that Mint did some analysis where the newspaper Mint that out of 15 high frequency consumption indicators, the Modi government had underperformed on 11 of them compared to UPA 2, the much maligned UPA 2. Forget UPA 1. So we are in trouble. And by the way, there's not a lot of fiscal space available too. Why?
I think there's a revenue shortfall of more than a lakh.
1.6 lakh crores.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you don't have 1.6, that's almost like $20+ billion.
Yeah.
You don't have that. And I think a Ninen in a business standard, or was it the print, I don't know, one of these places where he wrote that the actual fiscal deficit could be closer to 4%.
Yeah.
Now, that is huge. And on top of that, there's all this uncertainty about GDP data. And the credibility of Indian national statistics have been severely undermined.
Private investment yet to pick up. Yeah.
Private investment is not picking up. So I think we're in trouble. Now, what to do about it, that's a whole different thing. I think we need some short-term measures, but we need to keep an eye on the future now. I mean, if we don't...
There is the last chapter where we talk about the future. I want to focus on employment. Employment is the elephant in the room.
Yes.
Everybody's talking about it. This government Mr. Modi doesn't talk about employment in any of his speeches. No. It's been his weakest point. But you also mentioned in your book that structurally employment used to grow at 2% in the 70s, 80s. Yeah. Then it came down to 1.5%. But then most worryingly, you mentioned that in the really big growth period, boom period of 2003, late and subsequent period, there's been virtually no growth in employment.
Yeah, actually.
Now, if you and you also mentioned how technology, artificial intelligence, robotics, the big challenge. Now, where do you find jobs?
Okay, so first, to be fair to the current government, this unemployment problem is not a new phenomenon. This has been going on for a while. The interesting thing is that this problem has actually been increasing in scope over the years, and now I think we've reached we've reached a
crisis point where there is no growth in employment happening.
And then I talk about, of course, now you have all these youngsters in India who are going to school and college, and they get certificates. And they have smartphones, and they see what life is for other people in other parts of the world. They want that too. But with technology growing exponentially, there is potential for some kind of losses through that side as well. I think what we really have to focus on is health and education. Without health and education, without trying to... And by the way, proper health and education.
And you also talk about quality of state delivery. Yeah.
Quality, because you need a new contract with the state. I think this is not going to work anymore. You need you call it a social contract in some ways. So, I think if we don't, Amartya Sen is absolutely right. Okay, he's been saying this for so long.
Yeah. And you mentioned Amartya Sen versus Jagdish Bhagwati.
There's a big debate and all that.
That Amartya Sen says that the state has not been accountable to the bottom, 60-70% of the people who really need.
That's right.
Delivery of public goods.
Because it is a tax on poor people and low-income people if you don't deliver services properly. Yes. And before we start increasing the budgets for health and education, we have to actually make sure that we deliver good quality health and education with the money that we have, and then we start building in more resources for that. But that is a longer term solution. In the short term, I think we have to take lots of measures. First, I think the next government should really focus on making sure the institutions that I think have been degraded, they need to be made more robust, more professionalism and expertise has to be brought in. RBI should be made, the next government should affirm the RBI's autonomy, the autonomy of our economic institutions like the Central Statistical Organization. That is very important. Then we really need to think about how we can boost rural demand, and there are ways to do that through Manrega, through support prices, through other means. I think there are lots of instruments available. We have to look at the debt overhang in the rural economy as well. By the way, there is a debt overhang there. We have to then immediately, I think we need to focus on the NPA problem in the banking sector and the NBFC sector, which is a new problem.
Which has come in the last 6 months.
Yeah, which is going to be huge as well. So I think in the short term, there's not a whole lot you can do, but you can set the basis for a jump. But if we don't actually, but it all starts with institutions. It all starts with expertise. It all starts with a team. Again, I mean, this may be a political point here, but I really do not agree with the centralization kind of aspects of Prime Minister Modi. One final point, and this goes back to Ratin's concern. He talks about us falling into a middle income trap. But we are a low middle income country according to the World Bank's definitions. We are a low middle income country. Yeah. So we are in danger of being in a low middle income trap. That is a big worry, and that can have huge consequences.
And finally, Salman, you quote Dani Roderick and a few other scholars, which to my mind is the most worrisome structural problem, whether it's Modi government or any government, which is while the developed countries started facing, deindustrialization at per capita incomes of whatever $14,000, etc. And that's when the share of employment manufacturing are declining. But the developing countries are facing the same thing at $800, $1,000, at $2,000. I mean $1,800. So I don't know how do you diagnose this?
Actually, there are two similar problems for developing countries. One is premature deindustrialization. So basically, at very low levels of per capita income, you're deindustrializing.
So we'll never reach, our employment will never as a share of.
So we have to find other ways, right? So we have to find other ways. The other problem, which we have to think about, which is in the longer term, is aging. So countries like Japan aged at a high per capita income, but countries in Eastern Europe aged at a lower per capita income, and we are aging at an even lower per capita income. So we have a very serious demographic challenge as well. So on the one hand, we have this young youth bulge. On the other hand, we have this construct, which is kind of, our people are aging, remaining, obviously they're living, that's good, they're living longer, but at a lower level of income. That is why we cannot think as if we're in the 1960s and 70s. We have to think about creative. We have to think more creatively. Yeah, I mean, I think this whole idea will replicate China's model. New World Bank research has also indicated that for most developing economies, that's not a possibility.
So a lot of thinking, new research needs to be done. Yeah.
A lot of research needs to be done.
Thank you, Salman, for talking to us.
Thank you so much for having me.
And that's it. So please go and get a copy of this book. To understand where our economy is today and what a new government, whichever government, needs to do to revive the economy. Thanks for watching.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.